Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. I'm so glad you could join in today. I am just going to check and see who's about. We are live streaming on LinkedIn and Riverside. So if you're on LinkedIn, on Riverside, go ahead, pop a little comment on the chat. It would be lovely to know that you're there. As we're going through today as well, ask any questions through the webinar. I will be interacting, especially at the end where we will do a little bit of a Q&A. So here's the plan. We're going to have about 30 minutes of a bit of a webinar where I'm going to talk you through a few ideas that I'll share in a second. And then we'll have about 10 minutes of Q&A after. So just keep that in mind as we go through. So welcome to this, which is a third webinar in a series I've been doing. And this one is all about how do you lead difficult conversations in your school or in your setting with confidence. We all struggle with difficult conversations. No one really likes them. And the temptation can be to wing it. I'm going to teach you throughout this short webinar how to not wing it. I'm going to share a bit of research and I'm going to share with you a couple of practical strategies that I think you're going to find really, really useful. So a bit about me, who's chatting to you. So my name's Shane Leaning. I'm an organizational coach. I'm based in Shanghai in China. So it's currently 5 p.m. in China. Welcome wherever you are in the world. I know we've got people joining from Europe and across Asia. Australasia too is really, really good to have you here. I work mainly in the leadership space. So I work with a lot of some of the best leaders in the world. I've worked with thousands of leaders, very lucky to have done that, supporting with organizational change, organizational development, and personal leadership development as well. Now, you might have come across me before. If you have, it's probably from here. This is my podcast, Education Leaders, which I'm really super proud of. We're on episode 112 this week. A really great episode, actually. Stefan and Kaiser on gaming in education and whether we should be embracing gaming as a platform in our schools. Maybe a bit of a controversial topic. I would encourage you to tune in. This podcast is all about leadership in education, and every other week I interview leaders, like key great leaders across the world, some really wonderful thought leaders and big names there, and then every other week I share bite-sized leadership strategies. You can find Education Leaders on all the podcast platforms if you're that way inclined. This is kind of my free offer to the world, I guess, is that I want to share leadership stories, leadership advice, and I do that through the podcast, which has been going a few years and now is chart topping in many countries around the world. I'm also super proud to be the co-author of this book, Change Starts Here, which is all about schools reclaiming change for themselves. And I was really privileged to have co-authored this book with the brilliant Ephraim Lerner. He's based in London. I'm not going to really talk too much about that book. It's on pre-order at the minute. It's out in the summer, but you can give it a Google, have a look on Amazon. You can pre-order, get your hands on that if it's useful to you. So what are we talking about today? Well, we're going to be talking about one particular aspect of a leadership program that I am running. And it's based on this idea. This is a problem with most leadership development when you're thinking about developing as a leader. So maybe you've done some leadership development before. Maybe you've done a bit of a qualification in school leadership, or maybe you've done a master's or something like that. Or if you're from the UK, you might have done an NPQ, the National Professional Qualifications. Challenges with a lot of these leadership programs is a lot of them are 80% theory, 20% practice. Or at the very best, they're kind of looking at about, 50% theory, 30% reflection tasks, and 20% practice, if that. And really, when we know so much about learning, we would never expect this with our students in our classroom. Equally, we don't usually expect it with our teachers. We know that good learning is about doing, it's about reflecting, not being overly theoretical. You don't want to sit through sessions, read case studies, discuss concepts too much, because when you get back to your school, you're not actually sure how to apply what you've learned. So I've created a bit of a program. It's called the Intensive Leadership Program. I'll share this a little bit with you later. I don't really want to go into details. It's a 3-month program that starts in September, but the idea is this is a distinctly practical program helping you master 10 levers for really big results, like really going in all in on practical. Now, what do I mean by a lever? Well, this is going to be really important to this webinar, actually. A lever is something that is going to give an exponential amount of impact into your role. It's a lever that unlocks. I was speaking to a leader just this morning, actually, who's signing up to the program. And we were talking about the purpose of the programs that I deliver is to try and reduce the cognitive load a little bit of leaders so that you can lead, because leadership is really demanding, really cognitively demanding. You are balancing so many things and making so many decisions at the same time. Therefore, the approach that I take with leadership development is to give you a few levers that you can pull, small levers that you can pull that are going to make things a little bit easier. For example, how do you run an effective meeting? Have you really practiced that so that you've embedded that within yourself, and then when you get to that meeting, that's one lever you've pulled. You can focus on what the other person's saying. There's lots of different examples of these levers. In fact, there's 10 levers that I cover in the program, but today I wanted to share with you one of the most powerful levers, and that is about giving powerful feedback. In particular here, I'd like to talk to you about having difficult conversations. So over the next 20 minutes or so, we're going to talk about difficult conversations and how to have them. So let's start off. I want to share with you a little bit of research, and I think it's pretty shocking. So here's what some research reveals around difficult conversations. And this comes from a few different places. How fascinating is that top statistic? 70% of leaders avoid difficult conversations entirely. You would think a core part of being a leader is being able to lean into a difficult conversation. Yes, 70% of us, over 2/3, avoid them. And the sad thing is about this is it's not just uncomfortable, it's really costly for organizations. There's been some research done that showed that actually for every conversation we avoid, it costs an organization around $7,500 US. And not only that, each conversation avoided that was supposed to happen can result in 7 lost work days. Think about that in your school context. Maybe we avoid addressing that underperforming teacher, or when we delay discussing expectations with one of your colleagues, you're not just being kind to that person, you're being really costly to the success of your organization. But here's what's really caught my attention about some of this research that was done, the Atlanta research. They found that only 24% of employees directly confront challenging situations. Only 24% directly confront, and 53% actually handle toxic situations by ignoring them. 53%, like over half, the default strategy is to ignore them. As leaders, we're literally training ourselves to avoid the very conversations that actually could be having a real transformation to our schools. And if we're thinking in the context that I'm in, and maybe you're in, if you're working in an international school, these costs can compound massively when you factor in culture or recruitment and the unique challenges of those kind of communities. It's super, super costly. And look, I'm not saying that this with any judgment, because God knows I've avoided a lot of difficult conversations in my career. But I wanted to just highlight why this is such an important lever. Now, what kind of causes this problem? Because we get advised about difficult conversations a lot. You may have received advice about difficult conversations. Someone tells you, just do this, just do that. Now, why does it usually fall on deaf ears? Because you've probably been told, have a go at this, have a go at that before. Well, there's a few reasons. And, to be fair, these are areas that are very difficult to challenge. So first is confirmation bias. And that means that we unconsciously are seeking information that confirms what we already believe about a situation. We can't help ourselves. So if you've got someone about to have a difficult conversation with someone who you believe is difficult, you're going to interpret everything that they say and that they do through that lens. It's confirmation bias. We can't help ourselves. It's a survival tactic. We try to confirm things. Secondly is egocentrism. And I'm not just talking about the fact that we've all, as leaders, got big egos, and I'm sure we all do in a way, but actually more that what happens with egocentrism in our communication, it causes us to dramatically overestimate how much others understand our perspective. So often we think we're being clear when actually we're being confusing. You might have done that. You're like, I've said it and I understand it, so therefore they should understand it. We overestimate. We can't help that, right? Because you understand yourself better than anyone else. That leads to a bit of a discrepancy with your feeling of who else understands you. Maybe you've been in an argument or something and you just can't understand why are they being so awkward, like I've been so clear. This is a bit to do with our ego. And then the third point that I just wanted to mention today, because it's really important, that in international schools especially, we've got massive cultural blind spots. So there's many different processes to having a difficult conversation. I'm going to share one with you today. For example, there's a Harvard approach to difficult conversations, and that might work really, really well in Boston, but completely backfire when you go to Bangkok, because research shows that due to cultural differences, it can be really difficult to get to the heart of an issue without specialized cultural intelligence training. In fact, it's something that I'm doing this Friday with a school, working on that exact idea. I'll share a little bit with you in a couple of slides actually about that might bring it to life for you. What I do want to say at this point is that there's a lot of traditional advice that comes out, and you may have heard this. One, for example, is just be honest. If you're going into a difficult conversation, just be honest. Or another one is that classic sandwich feedback. Sandwich it between two compliments. Have you seen that? Compliment, feedback, compliment quickly, get past it. Now, I don't like to advocate for these approaches at all, because in theory, they sound good. In real experience, they often make things worse, not better. Here's the good news. So Columbia University, they actually did some research. They did a conversations lab, and they analyzed 59 dyads, so group pairs of people who were having polarizing conflicts, right? And they found something which I think is really remarkable. Structured conversations showed significantly better outcomes than unstructured approaches. Actually, you can see it on the screen there, 73% for structured approaches versus 31% for winging it. That's double the success just by following a clear framework. Double your success by following a framework. Our instincts sometimes can be feeling like, as a human, I need to deal with this naturally. This research is so clear. Double your success by using a framework. But here's what surprised me the most about this research. The optimal preparation time to prepare for one of these difficult conversations is 15 to 20 minutes, not hours of planning. A brief, focused preparation. This actually outperforms extensive planning. And the reason it does is because of what we mentioned at the beginning of this session, cognitive overload. You overplan, you overload. And the research shows that these structured preparation protocols, they actually have effect size. I've got it written down here, between 0.76 and 0.94. That's huge statistical significance. Also interesting is that when a conversation goes wrong, and let's face it, they will do, if you use evidence-based recovery techniques, some kind of recovery, you are likely to have 84% success rate if you acknowledge that within 24 hours. So even if you've had a challenging conversation, if you commit to an evidence-based strategy to recover that within 24 hours of what that hiccup that's happened, you're going to have such a better response rather than a delayed response. So let's now look at 2 practical ways you can approach a difficult conversation. I hope this is going to be useful for you. So this is a bit of a cheat sheet, really, a preparation secret, if you like. So this comes from an article. I'll share it with you after this webinar on how to prepare for that difficult conversation. And when you're preparing, you should prepare in this way. So you can see that pie chart. So firstly, you should spend 15% of your time clarifying your purpose. That's actually going, what do I want to achieve in this conversation? What do I want to achieve? Now, what I want to achieve in this conversation is not about proving you're right. Like if you've got a challenge that you need to present to someone, but it's about creating change. What do I need to create change? I'm going to give you an example of how this works in a second. So 15% purpose clarification. Then 35% of your time should be spent on a perspective analysis. So genuinely trying to understand their viewpoint. And it's not just here about being nice. These perspective talking exercises actually improve the outcomes by a third. So actually, before you go into the meeting, trying to get into their shoes and understand their perspective is going to give you a third better success. Then a quarter of your time should be on emotional regulation planning. This is about you. How do you stay calm when things get heated? How do you stay calm? What techniques are you going to do when things get heated? Because they usually do in these conversations. And then finally, 25% on planning recovery strategies. What are you going to do when the conversation goes sideways? What are you going to do when things start going wrong? So let me give you an example of what this looks like in practice. So imagine you need to address a teacher and they've been making some negative comments about this new assessment policy that you've launched in staff meetings. So they've been negative about a new policy. So let's have a look. What could we do? So we start off with purpose clarification. This is what we're preparing before. So what do I want to achieve? Well, what I'm wanting to achieve, I'm not wanting to prove I'm right about the policy, but what I'm wanting to achieve is to stop the negative commentary because it's undermining team morale. And ideally, I want to find out what support Mark needs. So we've got some purpose where we're going in. Perspective analysis. Okay, so we're going to try put ourselves in his shoes. So why might he be behaving this way? Well, we might acknowledge that he's been here 15 years and he's seen many policy changes come and go. And he might feel also that his experience isn't valued. Also, he could be feeling overwhelmed. This new assessment system, maybe it's got some new technology implications that make him feel overwhelmed. He also might be close to retirement, this teacher, for example, and might be resistant to major changes. List out those things. What things could it be? You're not saying what it is. You're obviously going to need to know that in a conversation. This is about preparing yourself for his perspective. It's going to help. Then you're going to do some emotional regulation. So how am I going to stay calm? So one thing that I always try to work on when I'm going into a difficult conversation is to remind myself that their resistance isn't personal. It's about them feeling secure in their role. And that really helps me to ground myself. But also maybe if we sense some defense, I sense that I'm going to get defensive about the policy, which I think I might do because it's a difficult conversation. I'm going to try stop, take a breath, and refocus on understanding the concerns. And importantly, a bit of a mantra to myself maybe is I'm going to try to say his comments are not an attack on my leadership and approach it from that perspective. So some emotional regulation techniques. And then finally, recovery planning. So if this goes wrong, what am I going to do? So If he becomes defensive, let me think what I can do. Is starting to get defensive. So maybe I can acknowledge his expertise. So maybe saying something like, you've seen many changes here, your perspective is really valuable. Or maybe if he keeps resisting, we can ask a question like, what would help you feel more confident with this system? Just by going through those preparation areas, you're going to feel a bit more confident, a bit more well prepared, and you are much more likely to have a successful conversation. Remember, we talked about that kind of double the success rate with these structured approaches, which is really, really useful. And remember, we're not over preparing. It's structure, not duration. That's what we're after at this point. So you've put your mind into the conversation, you've got yourself ready for this difficult conversation, and then bam, you're in it. What do you do? Well, we ideally need some more structure to follow. That's going to help us. And I'd like to share with you today a structure that has helped me for the last 10 years. I've used this framework and it's called COIN. I came across it. It's from Anna Carell, the feedback imperative. And I like the simplicity of this framework. It's one that really sits in my mind. If you've done training with me before, you'll have heard me talk about this method. Let's have a look at this and we can go through with a bit of a real scenario as well that we can use. So we're going to look at COIN. The idea is when you're going through, you're going to first set the scene with the context. You're going to give the context. You're going to then give an observation about what has happened. You're going to talk about the impact of what happened, how it affected others, and then you're going to talk about next steps. So imagine, just for the sake of this webinar, so you're a department head and one of your teachers, let's call her Sarah, so she's been consistently late for break time duty supervision. So break time duty, and she had a duty and she's been late for it several times. And you need to then have a conversation to resolve this challenge. Now you've done that preparation work and now we're going in and we're going to follow this COIN as a bit of a script to structure our conversation. So at the start of the conversation, what we do is we set the context, we set the scene, and we try to connect with the person. What you're doing here, you're not just launching in with an accusation or an attack. You're creating a bit of a safe space. So for example, you might say, Sarah, I'd like to talk to you about the duty supervision. I know how committed you are to student well-being, and maybe you've got an example of that, and our school's standards. So you just kind of set the scene. You're commenting on the topic. It brings you in. Next, you then give an observation. So that means sharing a specific factual description of what you witnessed. And here, there is no emotional language, no interpretation, just facts. So in this situation, for example, we might say, over the past few weeks, I've noticed you've arrived at the playground for break duty about 10 minutes after the bell rang. And that happened on Monday and Wednesday and Friday last week. And it also happened on Tuesday this week. So you're literally just giving the observation. Don't go further at this point. Not saying any emotion. You're not saying any interpretation. Because then we move on to the impact. We're not talking about impact first. That gets people defensive. Observation, then impact. Because here is where you then explain how their actions affected others and the organization. So it's the so what, and it helps them understand why the change matters. So you could literally frame it by saying the impact of this is, start it like that. The impact of this is that students were unsupervised during those 10 minutes, which creates some safety concerns for those students. In fact, on the Thursday, I saw some students having an argument, an unsupervised argument with no adults nearby. And it also meant that the other teacher, Emma, she had to cover both her assigned area and yours. And the impact of that, it left her feeling stretched. So we've talked about very specifically the impact. We've not gotten too wordy here. And then we finish with next steps. So this involves agreeing on the further actions together. And we're not dictating here, we're going to try collaborate. So for example, we might say something like, what I like us to work out together now is how we can ensure you're there when the bell goes. So maybe we ask a question: what's been preventing you getting there on time? And what support do you need from me to make this work? This approach, one, it gives you a structure, so it reduces your cognitive load. Two, it stops you fluffing and being wordy, which we do when we get nervous. But it also creates a bit of a dialogue, a space for dialogue rather than confrontation. Ideally, in this method, Sarah's not going to have felt attacked, but she's going to understand the impact, and she also gets to be part of the solution. I really like the simplicity of this. Super, super useful. And it works across cultures as well, because it's based on some universal principles: respect, clarity, collaboration. Super, super useful. So we've looked at preparing for a meeting, we've looked at that coin method, and this is just a quick idea. On the program that I deliver, we go into detail with this, we practice it a lot. But I want to finish by sharing with you a few questions that you could ask that can really help. Because there's a lot of research on questioning. I'm a coach myself, I love the power of a question. And there are certain questioning techniques that dramatically improve outcomes in conversations. So, for example, instead of asking, why did you do that? Why did you do that? That's a kind of common question. Why did you do that? Because you're wanting to know. This kind of question can trigger defensiveness. So instead of asking that, you might say, what makes you think that? And that's a reframe. A reframe, why did you do that, to what makes you think that, is a reframe that actually causes 73% improvement in response quality, because it moves from an accusation to curiosity. Why did you think that? Like, it's a curious approach. And another question you could use, just give you two questions now, is when you're wanting to move towards solution, is what would need to happen for this? This is another one, again, in Harvard Business Review, that showed 81% improvement in a solution focus compared to a problem focus question. So you're moving towards a solution in this question rather than sitting with the problem. And what I love is, you can have a little more read on this, but the neuroscience behind these questions is really, really fascinating. These questions literally change how the other person's brain responds in the conversation. So that's really super useful for you. So I hope that was useful today. Just a super short webinar with a bit of a structure for thinking about going into a difficult conversation, the coin method to help you out, and a few questions that might just get you out of a sticky situation. These difficult conversations are never easy, but as I said, this is a lever that, if you practice, will reduce your cognitive load and allow you to be a bit more present as a leader. Now, if what I've just shared with you resonates with you today, you might be interested about the Education Leaders Intensive program that I mentioned briefly at the beginning. So this is a 10-week program. It's over 3 months, where we go deep on each of the levers. So I've just introduced you to one lever. So that's one lever that we're going to go really deep with in the program. And we do 80% practice with this program. So actually, a typical week is we introduce the lever, you learn about it, then we do a lot of practice together in these online sessions, and then you go do it in your actual setting, and you get live feedback on that as well. Here's just a little bit of a highlight of what's on the program. We try to bring real scenarios from your context. So if you apply to this program, as part of the application, you'll be giving real scenarios from your context. And we only use real scenarios to rehearse in the program. They are not cold case studies. We also do leadership trios. We do peer coaching. We are working with another 2 people on coaching your practice and improving your practice. You get immediate feedback on your implementation. The way that works is, after you've tried something in real life, after we've practiced it, of course, in a safe space, you'll try it in real life, and instantly you will send me a voice message and let me know how it's gone. We'll reflect on that together. This is a really important part of how we learn, and it's going to really help you to grow as a leader. And then the community is super important to this. So you'll join a part of a community that over 10 weeks, I promise you, you're going to create great relationships with, and I'm very selective on this program. We only want people who are really passionate about getting better. I often say, if you're just wanting a certificate to put on your CV, go to a master's, go to an MPQ. That'll give you that. If you're wanting to really develop your leadership practice and after 3 months feel like you've grown as a leader and developed and you feel more confident, then this is the course for you. If you're interested in that, like I say, I didn't want to go into too much detail today, but you can scan this QR code or go to intensive.educationleaders.co, and that'll give you a link to download the curriculum. So you've got a bit of a brochure there. You can go through it in your own time, and hopefully that's useful for you. So we're going to finish up now with a bit of Q&A. So I am going to come into the chat box here and see who is in the chat. So hey everyone, I can see Emma, Andrew, Catherine, lovely to have you on. Riverside, love that conversation. Would like a copy of your question for point 4. Yes, let me get that to you, Catherine. I can certainly do that after here. Now I'm just going to have a check on LinkedIn because I know there are a few of you there. So let me just make sure I get into there and see if there's any questions. Hi, Chris. It's lovely to have you here. And interesting to see you reflecting on the MPQH and about leadership styles. I've just had enough of talking about what leadership style is, and I've delivered a lot of leadership programs. It seems like we all are obsessed with them, and yet we're kind of like the practical value of discussing your leadership styles, really tricky. I've got some questions that have popped up here. So how do you adapt the coin method for different cultural contexts? I work with teachers who might find direct feedback offensive. This happens in China a lot. This is actually high context cultures. I think it's a brilliant question. So there is a lot of research on this actually that shows that uncertainty avoidance cultures, they prefer structured approaches, which makes that coin method perfect. But you're right about adapting it. I think where you adapt when you're working with different cultures is by spending more time in a different part of it. So if you are in a high context culture, then that means you need to spend more time building relationships, showing respect. So you might say, like, I really value your expertise, dedication. It's why I want to discuss this together. But if you're like in a collectivist culture, like for example in China, you might want to frame it in terms of team harmony rather than individual consequences. So the structure remains the same, but your language changes a little bit. We, on the program, go into a little bit more detail in this, and I share some resources that can be helpful. Seb asks, what if the person becomes defensive during a conversation? Or emotional. Yeah, that's true. And I would take you back to that research that shows most conversations can be recovered within 24 hours if you've handled it well. I guess in the conversation, you'd want to first acknowledge it, acknowledge the emotion, don't ignore it. So I can see this is upsetting. Maybe say it wasn't your intention, and then return to those facts in your observation. If they're defensive, you might want to also ask, what would help you feel more comfortable discussing this? See what they bring you. Sometimes you just need to take a step back to context and just rebuild that safety before moving forward. And I often find that defensiveness, it's just a signal that they care and you're just not aligned on the problem. Yeah, it's not usually something else. And Eve asks a great question. What if I realize mid-conversation that I've misunderstood the situation? I've actually had this a lot. So that's the beauty of COIN. You start with the facts in your observation. But if they then say, so you've given the context, but if they then say, actually, what happened was this, then you just need to simply respond. Thanks for clarifying. So help me understand. and then you go into a conversation and you adjust. The worst thing you can do is stick rigidly to your script if they've just brought new information to you. So be careful. A framework is there to guide you. It's not there to imprison you in the conversation. Great question, Eve. Thank you. I'm just going to look on a few of the chats here and I'm just going to refresh. Sometimes I don't pick up everything on LinkedIn, so just bear with me while I just check. Okay. Well, I think that's all the questions that I can see. If there's some more, I will definitely reply in text on the screen. But hopefully that was just a useful half an hour to spend reflecting on difficult conversations. If you're interested in chatting about this or chatting about anything else, there's my email. It's on the screen, or you connect with me on Blue Sky, on LinkedIn, on the podcast. You can scan the QR code to get that curriculum if it's useful, or go to my website, educationleaders.co/intensive. It's been an absolute pleasure spending this time with you today, and all the best with that next difficult conversations. Take care, everyone.